Morty Smith looks like the most normal thing in the multiverse. A nervous boy in a yellow shirt pulled along behind a genius. That's the version everyone remembers. A crystal that shows him his perfect death. A grandfather who keeps him close. Because a child who loves you makes the best hiding place. One quiet line from the only Morty who ever got free. And in this video, we're falling asleep to Morty's secret addiction. The boy who could not say no. The first thing anyone learns about Morty Smith is that he is along for the ride. He is the grandson, the sidekick, the boy in the yellow shirt who gets pulled out of bed in the middle of the night and dragged across the universe by a drunk old man with a portal gun. That is the shape of the show from the very first minute. Rick has the plans, the science, the spaceship, and the nerve. Morty has the screaming, the stammering, and the bad feeling in his stomach that none of this is a good idea. For a long time, the audience reads the boy exactly the way the title invites them to read him, as the small half of a famous pair, the ordinary kid standing next to the smartest man alive. He is the one who says no. He is the one who begs to go home. He is the one who points out, over and over, that people are getting hurt, and then, every single time, he goes anyway. That is the quiet thing the show keeps doing, the move it makes so smoothly that it takes seasons to notice. Morty protests, and Morty goes. Morty swears he is done, and Morty comes back. Morty tells Rick he hates the adventures, that he is sick of being used, that he cannot take another day of it, and then the portal opens, and the boy steps through it, like a man who has forgotten how to stand still. The refusals are real, he means them in the moment, but they never once stop him, and the gap between what he says and what he does is the first clue that something deeper than obedience is going on. A boy who is merely forced does not keep choosing the thing he claims to hate. A boy who keeps choosing it is telling the truth with his feet and lying with his mouth, and the show is interested in that gap from the start. The cleanest early statement of the problem comes near the end of the first season, in the episode that introduces Rick's oldest friend. Birdperson sits Morty down and explains something about the man Morty thinks he knows. Rick has a catchphrase, a string of nonsense he shouts when he is happy or making a joke, and Birdperson tells Morty that in his own language those words are not nonsense at all. They mean that the speaker is in great pain and is asking for help. Morty waves it off. He says his grandfather is just saying it as a joke, that Rick is not that complicated, that he is simply a jerk. Birdperson does not let it go. He tells Morty that Rick really is in deep pain, that this is why he numbs himself, and then he asks Morty a question that lands harder than anything in the scene. He asks why Morty cares so much about whether the adventures continue, if Morty truly hates them as much as he claims. Fate, Birdperson points out, has just handed Morty a chance to be free of Rick forever. Why does that feel like a loss instead of a relief? Morty has no real answer. He stammers out that Birdperson is right, that he should not care, that this is probably the best thing that could ever happen to him, that he is sick of having adventures with Rick. He is reciting the lines he is supposed to say. He does not believe them, and the show knows he does not believe them, and the rest of the series is built on top of that single unconvincing speech, because the truth Birdperson stumbled onto is the truth the whole show is about. Morty is not trapped with Rick. Morty is hooked on Rick, and on everything Rick brings, and the part of him that begs to go home is at war with a much louder part that cannot imagine going home for good. To call it an addiction is not a stretch the show forces. It is a frame the show keeps building toward on purpose, episode after episode, until the word becomes the only one that fits. An addiction is not just a thing a person enjoys. It is a thing a person keeps returning to against their own judgment, a thing they defend even as it damages them, a thing that promises relief and delivers a deeper version of the ache it was supposed to fix. By that measure, the adventures qualify completely. They thrill Morty and they wreck him. They give him a reason to get up in the morning and they leave him burying bodies, real and otherwise, that no 14-year-old should ever have to look at. He gets a hit of something out there that he cannot get anywhere else, and he keeps going back to the well, long after the well has started to poison him. What makes the boy so easy to misread is that the surface story is genuinely a story of a kid being used. Rick pulls Morty out of school. Rick drags him into danger. Rick treats him, much of the time, as a tool rather than a grandson, and the show is honest that a great deal of the relationship is an old man grooming a useful helper rather than raising a child. All of that is true, and the series never pretends otherwise. But a tool does not love being a tool. A tool does not fight to stay in the hand that holds it. The thing that turns Morty from a victim into something more complicated and more tragic is that he wants this. Somewhere underneath the fear and the complaints, he has come to need the very thing that is hurting him, and the need is the secret the title points at. The addiction is secret not because the show hides it, but because Morty hides it, even from himself, behind a steady stream of objections he never acts on. The household around him reinforces how strange this is. Morty's mother Beth notes at one point that Morty does not really have any friends, which lands as a small line and opens a large door. If Rick is the closest thing Morty has to a friend, then the adventures are not just adventures. They are the entire social world of a lonely teenager, the only place place he feels chosen, the only arena where the most important person in his life seems to want him around. A boy with a full life and many friends might shrug off a dangerous grandfather. A boy with nothing else clings, and Rick is not just any grandfather. He is the smartest man in the universe, a figure the whole multiverse fears and follows, and being picked by him, being the one he takes along, is the single most flattering fact in Morty's small existence. The adventures are not only a thrill, they are proof that he matters to someone who matters to everyone. That is the hook the substance always has. It does not just feel good, it feels like meaning, it feels like belonging, it feels like being someone. And the cruel turn the show keeps making is that all three of those feelings are built on sand, because the relationship Morty is addicted to was, at its root, never the thing he believed it was. The series spends years slowly revealing why Rick really keeps a Morty close, and the answer guts the romance of it entirely. But even before that reveal lands, the audience can feel the wrongness in the dynamic. Morty's loyalty is enormous, and Rick's tenderness is rationed out in tiny, grudging doses, and the imbalance is exactly the imbalance of a person who needs a thing far more than the thing needs them back. Morty is always reaching. Rick is always almost pulling away. That shape, repeated across season after season, is the shape of a craving that is never quite satisfied, which is the only kind of craving that lasts. The show also makes sure the audience cannot dismiss the adventures as harmless fun the boy is silly to resist. They are not harmless. By the end of the very first season, Morty has already lived through things that would break most adults. He has watched a version of himself die. He has helped bury that body in his own backyard, and then walked into the dead boy's house and slept in the dead boy's bed. He has been cornered and assaulted on an adventure he begged to lead. He has had his legs broken in 3 places and been treated as a footnote while it happened. The trauma is real, and it accumulates, and the boy carries more of it with every season, and still he goes. That is the part that should not make sense. The part that only makes sense once the word addiction is on the table. A person fleeing a fire does not walk back into it because the smoke felt familiar. A person hooked does exactly that every time and hates themselves for it, and goes again. The genius of how the show frames Morty is that it never lets him become a simple addict the way a lesser story might. He is not weak, and he is not stupid, whatever the running jokes about his intelligence suggest. He is something more recognizable and more painful. He is a kid who found, in the worst possible place, the one thing that made him feel alive, and who cannot bring himself to give it up, even as it costs him pieces of who he is. The complaints are not a performance for the audience. They are the sound of the better part of him losing an argument with the part that is already reaching for the next fix. Every time he says he wants out and then steps through the portal anyway, the show is letting the audience watch a relapse in real time, dressed up as a wacky sci-fi gag. There is a detail in how the series structures its own jokes that drives this home. The adventures almost always go wrong. That is the formula. Morty wants something, the want leads to disaster, the disaster leaves bodies and wreckage, and a boy more shaken than before. And the lesson, if there is one, is usually that he should have listened, should have stayed home, should not have wanted the thing at all. By any normal logic, a person who lived through that pattern even a handful of times would learn to stop. Morty lives through it dozens of times and never stops, and the show is quietly using its own repetition to make a point. The repetition is the symptom. The fact that nothing he suffers is ever enough to keep him away is not a flaw in the writing. It is the diagnosis. He cannot learn the lesson because the lesson asks him to give up the only thing he cannot live without. And the substance, in his case, is not one clean thing. That is what the rest of this climb is going to take apart, piece by piece, because Morty's addiction has layers, and each layer hooks him in a different way. There is the literal drug the show eventually hands him, an object that gives him a fix so pure it rewrites his entire personality in a single afternoon. There is the older, deeper dependence on Rick himself, on being needed and being chosen, a need that turns out to rest on a foundation colder than Morty ever imagined. There is the pull of escape, the way the show keeps offering Morty doors out of his own life, and the way he keeps walking through them. There is the inheritance, the thing in his blood that his grandfather names out loud in the most recent stretch of the series, a sentence so bleak it reframes everything that came before it. And there is the question of memory, of consequence, of whether a boy who can erase his own mistakes ever has to feel anything at all. Each of those is a hook, and each of those is a wall, and together they make up the secret the boy carries through every episode he is in. The point of laying them out is not to turn Morty into a junkie or to flatten him into a cautionary tale. He is neither. He is one of the most sympathetic figures the show has, precisely because his addiction is so understandable. Who would not want to be chosen by the smartest man alive? Who would not want a door out of an ordinary, lonely teenage life? Who would not want, on the worst days, a way to simply not feel the things that hurt? The tragedy is not that Morty wants these things. The tragedy is that the show keeps proving, gently and relentlessly, that the things he wants are eating him, and that the boy who looks like the safe, sane, ordinary half of the famous pair is the one quietly losing the most. So the boy who could not say no is the place this has to start, because the no is the whole misdirection. For seasons, the audience hears Morty refuse and reads the refusals as the truth of him, the decent kid resisting a bad influence. But the refusals are the lie. The truth is in the going, in the coming back, in the unconvincing speech to Bird Person, in the way a lonely 14-year-old keeps choosing the one relationship that hurts him most, because it is also the only one that makes him feel real. That is where the climb begins. From here it goes down into the wound that started it, and then through every form the craving takes, all the way to the single line, spoken late and by another version of him entirely, that finally says out loud what the boy in the yellow shirt could never admit. He is not trapped, he is hooked. And the distance between those two words is the saddest thing the show ever built. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The first section set the frame. A boy who says no and goes anyway, hooked on the one thing that hurts him most. Next, the focus turns to the wound that started it all. The single afternoon Morty buried his own body in the backyard and learned to stop feeling. Section 2. The grave in the backyard. Every addiction has a first wound underneath it, a place where the hurt began before the habit grew up to cover it. For Morty, that place is a patch of dirt behind the house, and what is buried there is his own corpse. The show plants this early, in the 6th episode of the whole series, and then it returns to that grave again and again across the years, treating it as the quiet trauma that hardened the boy and set the rest of him in motion. To understand why Morty keeps reaching for escape, for the next adventure, for any door out of his own life, the climb has to go back to the day the show first taught him that a life could simply be left behind, and that the person doing the leaving could just keep walking. The episode begins with something small and human. Morty has a crush on a girl at school named Jessica, and there is a dance coming up, and he is 14 and terrified and desperate the way only a 14-year-old can be. So he does what he always does. He goes to his grandfather. He asks Rick for help, for some kind of love potion that will make Jessica want him, and Rick, treating the whole thing as a trivial favor, mixes up a serum and hands it over. It is a tiny, ordinary, slightly pathetic wish. A boy wants a girl to like him. There is nothing cosmic about it, and that is exactly why what happens next lands the way it does, because the show takes the smallest possible teenage want and uses it to end the world. The serum works at first, the way Morty hoped. Jessica becomes interested, and then it does not stop. Jessica has the flu, and the potion binds with the flu virus and goes airborne, and within minutes the entire human population is infected, every person on Earth overwhelmed with desperate love for Morty. Rick tries to fix it. His antidote makes things worse, mutating the infected into monstrous creatures, and then a second attempt mutates them again into something even more grotesque, a planet full of twisted, melted things the show names after a famous director of body horror. The whole of humanity has been turned into a swarm of monsters, and it happened because a lonely boy wanted a date and a careless old man said yes without thinking. What Morty learns in that moment is the first hard lesson of his life with Rick, and it is not a lesson about chemistry. Faced with a planet he has personally helped ruin, Morty waits for his grandfather to fix it, because that is what grandfathers in stories do. That is what the smartest man alive should be able to do, and Rick cannot. Or rather, Rick will not. The smartest man in the universe looks at the broken world and decides it is not worth the trouble of repair. Instead, he reaches for the move that will come to define both of them. He scans the multiverse, finds a reality almost exactly like their own, a reality where the disaster never happened, and where the local Rick and Morty have conveniently just died in a lab accident. And then he tells Morty they are going to leave. They are going to abandon their ruined world entirely, step through a portal into the new one, bury the dead versions of themselves in the backyard, and slip into the empty lives like nothing ever happened. Morty does it. He is a child, and his grandfather is telling him this is the only way, and so a 14-year-old boy digs a grave in the dirt and lowers his own dead body into it. He looks at his own face, gone slack and lifeless. He covers it with earth, and then he walks into the house that belongs to a dead boy, sits at the table with a mother and a father and a sister who are not quite his, and begins, that very night, to pretend. The show scores the moment with a quiet, aching song, and it does not look away. It makes the audience sit in the horror of what a child has just been asked to do, and it makes clear that something in Morty broke right there, in that yard, with the shovel in his hands. He keeps the secret for a long time. He tells almost no one, and the show comes back to the weight of it across the seasons, treating that backyard grave as the foundational damage of the character, the thing underneath everything else. 2 episodes later, when his sister Summer is falling apart over a discovery about her own life, Morty finally lets the secret out, and the way he does it is one of the most quietly devastating speeches the series ever wrote. Summer has learned she was an unplanned pregnancy, that she was not, in some sense, meant to be, and the knowledge has shattered her. She is packing to run away, and Morty, trying to talk her down, does not reach for comfort. He reaches for the truth that has been eating him alive. He tells her about the other reality. He tells her that he and Rick destroyed their own world and fled to this one. He tells tells her that every single morning he eats breakfast 20 yards away from his own rotting corpse. And then he gives her the line that has become, for many, the thesis of the entire show. He tells her that nobody exists on purpose, that nobody belongs anywhere, that everybody is going to die, and then he asks her to come watch television. It is a stunning thing to put in the mouth of a child. It is the philosophy of a much older, much more broken mind, the worldview of someone who has seen too much and decided the only sane response is to stop searching for meaning and numb out in front of a screen. And the boy delivering it is 14. This is the moment the show reveals what the grave did to him. The lesson Morty took from burying himself was not that life is precious. It was the opposite. It was that life is replaceable, that a person can ruin a world and simply step into a fresh one, that nothing is so broken it cannot be abandoned for a cleaner copy. That is a useful lesson for an addict to learn, because it is the lesson that makes escape feel like wisdom. If nothing finally matters, then running from everything is not cowardice, it is just facing facts. And Morty, at 14, has been handed that grim freedom by the grandfather he worships, and it has carved out the hollow place that every later craving will rush to fill. There is something worth sitting with in how young he was when this happened. The show is careful to remind the audience, through this grave, that Morty's whole relationship with consequence got broken at the root. He learned, before he was old enough to drive, that consequences can be outrun. Do something unforgivable, and you do not have to live with it. You portal away, you bury the evidence, which in this case is your own body, and you begin again somewhere the bill has not come due. That is the exact mechanism of every escape the show will later offer him, and it traces straight back to this dirt. The death crystals, the do-over device, the simulated lives, all of them are just more elegant versions of the same move he first made with a shovel in his hands. Run, leave it behind, start over where it never happened. The grave also reframes the home the audience watches for the rest of the series, and this is one of the show's coldest details. The family at the center of the story, the mother and father and sister Morty lives with through every later episode, are not his original family. They are the family of the dead boy in the yard. Morty's real parents, his real sister, are back in the ruined world he fled, or rather their bodies are, since that world was left to rot. The home that should be the one safe place, the warm center the boy returns to after each dangerous trip, is itself a borrowed thing, a set he stepped onto after the real one burned down. There is no true home for Morty to go back to. The home is part of the escape, and a boy with no real home to anchor him is a boy with nothing to pull him back from the next portal, which is precisely the condition an addiction needs to flourish. What makes the wound so much sadder is the smallness of the want that caused it. Morty did not ask for power or riches or revenge. He asked for a girl to notice him. He wanted to be liked. That is the most human, most forgivable wish a lonely teenager can have, and the show let it metastasize into the end of a world and the burial of his own body. The lesson buried in that is brutal. It says that even Morty's gentlest desires are dangerous, that wanting anything at all when you are tied to Rick can detonate into catastrophe, and a boy who learns that his own simple wishes lead to graves is a boy who will start to distrust his own wants, to feel that his desires are a kind of curse. That self-distrust is its own quiet trauma, and it feeds directly into why he can never quite stop following Rick. If his own judgment leads to disaster, then maybe he is better off surrendering it to the man who at least knows how to survive the disasters. The grave did not just teach him that escape is possible, it taught him not to trust himself, which left him leaning even harder on the one person he should have trusted least. The show never lets Morty fully heal from this, and it never lets him fully forget it. The grave keeps coming up. Years later, when the family is scattered back to their original dimensions in a freak accident, the consequences of that long-ago burial come crashing back, and Morty has to face the father he abandoned, the family he left to rot, and answer for the fact that he never once tried to save them. He had the means. He knew, roughly, where that ruined world was. He could have gone back, he never did, and when his abandoned father confronts him about it, there is no clean defense, because there is no clean answer. Morty left them, and then he kept leaving them, and the boy who once cried over a grave grew into someone who could simply not think about the people he had buried. That is the addict's other great skill, the talent for not looking at the wreckage, and Morty learned it young, in that yard, from the master. It is worth being precise about what the show is and is not saying here. It is not saying Morty is a monster. A child cannot be blamed for following a parent figure's instructions in the middle of an apocalypse. The horror is not Morty's guilt. The horror is what the experience did to him, the way it rewired a young mind to treat the most extreme escape imaginable as a reasonable option, a tool in the kit, a thing you do when the situation gets bad enough. Most people never face a choice like that. Morty faced it at 14 and chose, because he was told to, and then spent the rest of the series living with a nervous system that had learned escape was always on the table. Once you know, deep in your body, that you can always run to a cleaner world, every hard thing becomes a little more optional, and every craving for the next door gets a little stronger. So the grave in the backyard is the bedrock of everything that follows. It is where Morty learned that lives can be left, that consequences can be outrun, that a person can bury the worst thing they ever did and walk into a borrowed life and simply not feel it. That lesson is the soil the whole addiction grows in. The thrill-seeking, the inability to quit Rick, the hunger for any escape the universe offers, all of it roots down to a 14-year-old standing over a hole with a shovel, learning the single most dangerous thing a person can ever learn, that you do not have to stay and face it. You can always go somewhere it never happened. The rest of the climb is the long story of how often he tries, and how little it ever helps, and how the one thing he can never outrun is the boy he buried that day, who is still down there, 20 yards from the breakfast table, waiting. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The grave showed the wound underneath everything. A child who learned that any life can be abandoned and any consequence outrun. Next, we go to the relationship that Wound left him reaching for. The bond with Rick himself, and the cold reason the smartest man alive really keeps a Morty close. Section 3. A human cloaking device. The deepest thing Morty is hooked on is not a drug or an adventure or a screen. It is a person. It is Rick, and the feeling of being wanted by Rick, the sense that out of everyone in the whole endless multiverse, the smartest man alive chose him to ride along. That feeling is the strongest fix the show ever gives the boy, the one underneath all the others, and it is also the one the series eventually pulls apart in the cruelest way possible. Because there is a reason a Rick keeps a Morty close, a real, mechanical, documented reason, and when Morty finally learns it, the thing he has built his whole sense of worth around turns out to have been a lie from the first day. The reveal comes near the end of the first season, in the episode that first opens up the wider world of the show. Rick has been framed for a string of murders, and the hunt for the real killer drags him and Morty into the Citadel, a vast city populated by nothing but other versions of Rick and other versions of Morty, thousands upon thousands of them, all paired off the same way. Morty notices the pattern immediately. Everywhere he looks, a Rick has a Morty at his side. He asks his grandfather why. Why does every Rick travel with a Morty? And Rick, in a tossed-off, almost bored explanation, tells him the truth. A Rick, he says, gives off a very particular kind of brainwave because of his genius, a signal that powerful enemies can track. The best way to hide that signal is to stand close to someone whose brainwaves cancel it out. When a Rick is near a Morty, the genius waves get covered over by the Morty waves, and the Rick becomes invisible. Morty, slowly understanding, asks if that is because their personalities are so different. Rick does not really answer. He moves on, but the point has landed, and Morty says it out loud himself, the line that hollows out everything he thought he was. He asks if that is all a Morty is, a human cloaking device. The implication is brutal in its simplicity. The reason a Morty rides beside a Rick is not love, it is not mentorship, it is not even fondness, it is camouflage. The boy is a piece of equipment, a screen to hide behind, valuable because his ordinary mind muffles his grandfather's extraordinary one and makes the old man harder to find. And the show drives the horror of it home in the same episode, when Rick and Morty track the killer to his lair and discover what a truly committed Rick will do with this knowledge. The killer's hideout is a dome, and the dome is covered, top to bottom, in Mortys. Hundreds of them, naked, strapped to the surface, kept in constant agony by machines that stab at them without end. Because one Morty is enough to hide from the average enemy, but a whole field of suffering Mortys creates a signal strong enough to hide even from other Ricks. This is what Morty learns about his own kind. Across the multiverse, Mortys are not grandsons. They are tools, and at the worst extreme, they are fuel, batteries of pain wired into a wall so that a Rick can disappear. The boy who thought he was special, who thought being chosen meant something, is standing in front of a monument to exactly how little a Morty is worth to the men who keep them, and his own Rick is standing next to him, unbothered, treating the dome of tortured children as a clever bit of engineering rather than a nightmare. It would be one thing if this were just background lore, a grim fact about the wider world that did not touch Morty's own life, but the show makes sure it does. It makes the camouflage the literal foundation of Morty's own relationship with his own Rick. Whatever else grew between them later, the partnership began, on Rick's side, with the cold calculation that this particular boy would make effective cover. The most important bond in Morty's life, the one he has organized his whole sense of self around, started as a tactical decision. He was useful. He muffled the signal. That is why he was taken along, before he was ever loved, if he was ever loved at all. And here is where the show refuses to be simple, because it would be easy to leave it there, to say the relationship is pure exploitation and nothing more. But the same season that reveals the cloaking device also shows Rick, captured and having his memories scanned, weeping at the sight of Morty as a baby, reaching out toward him. The enemy mocks him for it, for his irrational attachment to the boy, and Rick cannot fully hide that the attachment is real. So the truth is worse than simple cruelty. The truth is that both things are true at once. Morty is a tool, and Morty is loved, tangled together so tightly that neither Rick nor Morty can ever fully separate them. The boy can never be sure which one he is on any given day, the grandson Rick cried over, or the equipment Rick hides behind, and that uncertainty is its own slow poison. For an addict, this is the perfect trap, because it is exactly exactly the structure that keeps a person hooked the longest. If Rick were only cold, Morty might eventually leave. If Rick were only warm, the relationship would not hurt the way it does. But Rick is both, unpredictably, doling out the rare moment of tenderness in between long stretches of contempt, and the unpredictability is what makes it impossible to quit. A reward that comes every time is easy to take for granted. A reward that comes only sometimes, with no way to predict when, is the one that hooks the deepest, because the person keeps trying, keeps reaching, keeps showing up in hope that this time the warmth will come. Morty lives inside that cycle. He never knows whether the next adventure will bring the grandfather who cried over his baby photo, or the one who treats him like a battery, and so he keeps coming back to find out, and the not knowing is the chain. The brainwave detail does something else too, something quieter and sadder. It poisons the one thing Morty had, which was the belief that he was chosen. Before the reveal, Morty could tell himself that of all the people Rick could have taken along, Rick took him. That belief is precious to a lonely boy with no friends, a boy whose own mother has noticed he has no one. It is the thing that makes the danger and the abuse bearable, the idea that it all means he is special. And the show takes it away. It tells Morty and the audience that he was not chosen for anything in himself. He was chosen because his brain was ordinary enough to hide a genius. The very thing that made him useful was his lack of anything remarkable. He is special in the eyes of the man he worships, precisely because he is not. What the boy does with this knowledge is the heart of the tragedy. He could walk away. The reveal hands him every reason to. He has just learned that his whole bond is built on being used, that his kind are tortured by the thousand to make better camouflage, that he was selected for his blankness, and he stays. In the same episode, when the captured Mortys rise up in rebellion, and Morty leads them, when he has the chance to free his grandfather, or leave him to die, he frees him, and tells Rick that if he were really a Rick, he would have left him there. It is a flash of spine, a moment of the boy almost breaking the chain, and then the moment passes, and the partnership continues, because the spine and the addiction live in the same body, and the addiction wins. The show keeps returning to this dependence, and keeps finding new depths in it. Years later, in the episode where Rick stores away Morty's worst memories, the audience learns that Rick has not only erased the things too painful for Morty to keep, he has also erased moments where Rick himself looked foolish, scrubbed them from his grandson's mind to protect his own pride. Among the buried memories is one where the boy's mother, given the choice, saved his sister and left Morty to be taken. Rick reaches into Morty's head and edits it like footage, deciding what the boy gets to know about his own life. That is the ultimate expression of treating a person as a tool. You do not just use them, you curate their reality, shape their memories, decide which truths they are allowed to carry. Morty's mind is not fully his own. Parts of it have been removed by the man he depends on for that man's convenience and comfort, and still he stays. That is the engine of this whole level of the addiction. The way nothing Rick does is ever enough to break the boy's need for him. The show stages this most directly near the end of the 5th season, when Rick decides, for real this time, to end the partnership. He has come to see, on his own, how toxic the relationship is, and so he replaces Morty in a deliberately humiliating gesture with a pair of crows, and tells the boy he would be better off without him. Morty is heartbroken, not relieved the way a freed prisoner would be. Heartbroken, the way a person is when the thing they are hooked on is taken away, and the boy does not celebrate his freedom. He spends the next stretch of the show trying to get Rick back, scheming and aging himself, and chasing the grandfather who told him to go, because being released from the chain felt like loss, not rescue. There is a version of this story where Morty's loyalty is simply heartwarming, the good grandson who loves his flawed grandfather no matter what. The show flirts with that reading and then keeps undercutting it, because the loyalty is too desperate, too one-sided, too willing to absorb too much. A healthy love does not require this much swallowing. The amount Morty forgives, the amount he ignores, the speed with which he comes running back every time Rick pushes him away, those are not the marks of a balanced bond. They are the marks of a need that has gotten out of the person's control. He cannot stop needing Rick any more than he can stop needing the adventures, and the two are the same, need wearing different clothes, because the adventures are just the time spent with Rick, the proof that Rick still wants him near. The cloaking device reveal is the show's way of telling the audience the worst version of the truth early, and then spending years showing that the worst version is also somehow not the whole of it. Morty is used, and Morty is loved. Morty is camouflage, and Morty is a grandson Rick once cried over. The boy is hooked on a relationship that began as a tactic, and the not knowing where the tactic ends and the love begins is exactly what keeps him there. He stays for the warmth that comes sometimes, and he tolerates the cold that comes most of the time, and he can never get enough of the one to make up for the other, which is the precise definition of a craving that never resolves. So the deepest layer of the addiction is a person, and the person is a trap built out of the two truths Morty can never untangle. He needs to be wanted by Rick, and the wanting started as a function, and the function curdled into something realer that Rick will barely admit and barely show. The boy lives suspended between those facts, reaching for a love that is real enough to keep him hoping and rationed enough to keep him starving. surviving. He learned in the backyard that he could run from anything, but he never learned to run from this. The one door Morty will not walk through is the one that leads away from Rick, even when Rick himself is holding it open, and that single refusal, more than any crystal or any game, is the truest measure of how deep the hook goes. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This section found the deepest hook of all. A boy who needs the grandfather who only keeps him for cover and cannot leave even when the door is held open. Next, the focus turns to the purest hit the show ever gives him. A crystal that shows him one perfect death and the killing spree he commits to reach it. Section 4. One perfect death. Of all the things Morty gets hooked on across the run of the show, only one of them is a drug in the plainest sense. A single object that delivers a fix so pure and so total that it rewrites his entire personality in the space of an afternoon. It arrives at the start of the 4th season, in the episode that opens with a family breakfast and ends with the boy turned into something monstrous, and it is the clearest, most undisguised look the series ever gives at what addiction does to him. Everything else in this climb is a craving the show builds slowly and lets the audience name for themselves. This one, the show is willing to call by its name out loud. By the end, the boy himself is described as captivated, blindly obeying, unable to let the object go. It is the literal version of the secret the whole story is about. The thing is called a death crystal. Rick takes Morty to a planet to harvest them, and the crystals have a strange and specific power. When a person holds one, they see, branching out around them, all the different ways they might die. The visions shift as the person moves and chooses, because the future flows from the present, and a different present produces a different end. To Rick, the crystals are a tool, a combat aid, a way to read a fight by checking which deaths are certain and which are still in play. He treats them the way he treats everything, as equipment, and he has nothing but contempt for the people who mine them illegally, calling crystal poachers the lowest form of life, parasites who treat the galaxy like their own piggy bank. But Morty steals one, and for Morty, the crystal becomes something else entirely, because among the dozen or so deaths it shows him at any moment, flickering at the edges of his sight, there is one he cannot stop looking at. He sees himself as an old man, dying peacefully in bed, and beside him, holding his hand, is Jessica, the girl he has loved since the very first season, whispering that she loves him. That is the hit. That is the dose. For a boy whose whole life has been danger and trauma, and the cold of a grandfather who barely shows he cares, the crystal offers a vision of the one thing Morty has never had any real hope of getting: love, a long life, a gentle ending with the person he wants beside him. It is everything the adventures have stolen from him, dangled in front of him as a possible future, and all he has to do to reach it is follow the crystal's guidance, step by step, away from every path that leads anywhere else. It is worth pausing on how the episode plants the want even before the crystal appears, because the opening scene shows Morty on his phone, scrolling through Jessica's social media, fixating on her, watching her from a safe and pathetic distance, the way a boy does when he wants someone he is too frightened to actually approach. The crush is already an obsession before the crystal ever enters his hand. The crystal does not create the longing, it finds the longing already there, already feverish, and pours fuel on it. And this is where the show stops being subtle about the addiction, because what follows is, in every meaningful way, the story of a person consumed by a substance. The crystal reshapes Morty completely. It changes how he acts, how he moves, even how he speaks. The boy who used to stammer and hesitate becomes single-minded and cold, his whole personality narrowing down to one purpose, reaching the death the crystal promised him. He loses himself in it. The desire for that one perfect ending overtakes everything else, every other want, every other value, until there is nothing left of the old Morty but the pursuit. That is what a real addiction does. It does not just add a craving to a person. It hollows out everything that is not the craving, until the person and the need are the same thing. The boy carries the crystal in his pocket like a junkie carries a stash, checking it, consulting it, letting it steer him, and the show makes a point of showing how the steering reshapes even his face and his posture, turning the soft, frightened kid into something hard and purposeful and wrong. And the things he does in service of the fix are monstrous, because the crystal only shows the death, never the path to it. Morty is left guessing, steering blindly toward the vision, and the steering turns him into a killer. The trouble starts small, with a school bully he accidentally provokes, and then it escalates, because the crystal keeps showing him that the path to old age with Jessica runs through more and more violence. He raids Rick's arsenal. He grabs the most powerful weapons in the garage. He takes nearly all of Rick's emergency creatures, the helpful blue beings Rick keeps boxed up, leaving behind only the cheap, useless, knockoff versions. And then he goes on a rampage, a bloody spree across his town that pulls in the police and eventually the army, all of it in the name of nudging the future toward the one branch where he dies old and loved. He commits massacre after massacre, immoral act after immoral act, because the crystal suggested that this was the way, and he is too far gone to question it. The boy who once begged to go home, who once cried over a single death, is now leaving bodies in his wake, to secure a peaceful ending for himself. The show leans into the horror of the transformation with its choice of reference. The episode openly nods to a famous piece of animation about a boy whose power spirals into destruction, and characters in the show even call Morty by that boy's name, the police and the news labeling him after the doomed figure from that story. Even Morty's father, in an argument earlier in the episode, begs that he does not want to see any more of that kind of dark anime business happening to his son, a line that plays as a joke and lands as a warning the show is about to make literal. The point is unmistakable. This is a story about a young person whose pursuit of one thing turns him into a force of ruin, and the one thing, in Morty's case, is the fantasy of a good death. He becomes so dangerous that he avoids a certain prison sentence by reciting the dying words of a judge's husband, words the crystal must have shown him, and drives the judge to take his own life with them. He escapes all consequences in the end through an even darker trick, letting out a sound, a kind of cognitive weapon, that sways everyone listening into forgiving him completely and wipes the whole massacre from public memory, rendering it, in the show's own framing, canonically irrelevant. The boy gets away clean, which is its own grim echo of the lesson he learned in the backyard. Run hard enough, and the bill never comes due. There is a second story braided through all of this, and it sharpens the meaning of the first, because while Morty is being consumed by his crystal, Rick is going through his own loop of addiction in miniature. Early in the episode, Morty's blind steering of the ship causes a crash that kills Rick, and Rick's consciousness survives only because of a contingency he built long ago, a system that revives him in the body of an alternate version of himself in another reality. But the system keeps depositing him in worlds run by fascists, and so Rick is forced to claw his way through reality after reality, committing the same desperate acts over and over to reach a stable world where a local Rick and Morty can help him get home. While the boy chases his perfect death, the grandfather is trapped in his own cycle of dying and being reborn into nightmares, hopping bodies, repeating himself, unable to stop. The episode sets the two side by side on purpose. Both of them are caught in loops they cannot break, both of them treating their own deaths as logistics rather than endings, both of them reaching, compulsively, for the next version of the thing that keeps them going. The grandfather's addiction to survival and the grandson's addiction to a fantasy are filmed as mirrors, two members of the same family, running the same broken program in different forms. But the cruelest part of the Death Crystal arc is not the violence, and it is not the parallel with Rick. It is what the crystal was actually showing him, revealed in the episode's final moments. Morty believed the vision meant that he and Jessica would end up together, that the peaceful deathbed was the reward for a life shared with her. He built a killing spree on that belief. And then, after the chaos, he overhears Jessica talking about her own future, her plan to become a hospice worker, someone who sits with the dying and comforts them in their final moments. And Morty understands, all at once, what he saw. The old man in the bed was him, dying alone. The Jessica beside him was not his wife, not his partner, not the love of a long life together. She was a stranger, doing her job, a hospice worker comforting a random patient at the end, telling a dying man she loved him the way such workers do for people who have no one else. The vision was not a future of love, it was a future of being so alone that the only person to hold his hand at the end was paid to be there. The crystal even shows him, near the close, the deeper truth of the path he was on. It reveals that this future, the one he chased through all that blood, was a future where Morty lives a lonely and unhappy life, never finding anyone but Jessica, and never actually being with her, holding her at a distance, avoiding her, clinging to a person he will not let himself reach. He cyberstalks her at the start of the episode, and ends up dying beside a stranger at the end of his life. And the line connecting those 2 points is a lifetime of wanting someone and never closing the gap. The whole vision he murdered for was a portrait of his own failure. The drug promised him love and showed him, in the fine print he could not read, a long emptiness, ending in the kindness of a stranger. That is the most honest thing the show ever says about what the fix offers. It dangles the exact shape of the thing you most want, and what it actually delivers, if you chase it, is a hollow imitation that leaves you worse off than before. The crystal did not even lie. It showed him the truth. He simply saw what he wanted to see, the way an addict always does, reading the promise and skipping the cost. This is what makes the Death Crystal the purest distillation of Morty's addiction. Every element is there, undisguised. There is the substance, the object that delivers the hit. There is the fantasy it sells, a future of love and peace and belonging, all the things the boy has been starved of. There is the transformation, the way the craving overwrites the whole personality until the person is gone and only the need remains. There is the wreckage, the bodies left behind in pursuit of the high, an entire town terrorized, a judge dead, the police and the army drawn in. And there is the bitter truth underneath, that the thing the fix promised was never real, that chasing it cost more than it could ever pay, that the boy who wanted love so badly he killed for it was being shown, the whole time, a vision of dying alone. It matters too that the want at the center of it is so small and so human, just like the want that started the grave in the backyard. Morty does not crave power or revenge. He craves love. He craves a gentle ending with someone who cares about him. That is the most understandable desire a lonely, traumatized teenager could have. And the show takes that desire and shows how, fed into the machinery of escape and fantasy, it curdles into something that destroys everyone around him and leaves him empty. The tragedy is not that Morty wants to be loved. The tragedy is that he wants it so badly and has been hurt so often that he will chase a counterfeit version of it straight off a cliff, mistaking the picture of the thing for the thing itself. The same boy who once asked Rick for a love potion to win Jessica is now asking a crystal for a guaranteed ending with her, and both times the shortcut to love becomes a catastrophe, which is the show quietly telling the audience that Morty's hunger always takes the same dangerous shape. He cannot just want a person. He has to reach for a machine that promises to deliver them, and the machine always extracts a price he did not see coming. The episode also sits inside a larger pattern the fourth season keeps repeating, and the pattern is worth naming because it shows the writers were thinking about exactly this. Across that stretch of the show, Morty is handed object after object that promises consequence-free fulfillment, and each one teaches him a brutal lesson about wanting things the easy way. The Death Crystal is the first and the sharpest, but it is part of a run of stories about a boy reaching for shortcuts to the things he longs for, and being shown, every time, that the shortcut is a trap. In one later episode, Rick lets Morty chase the thrill of a heist until the obsession burns out. In another, he hands Morty a device that promises a life without consequences and reveals it to be a graveyard. The crystal is the version where the shortcut nearly turns him into a mass murderer, and where the reward at the end is revealed to be a vision of the loneliest possible death. It is the season telling its audience, over and over, that Morty's hunger for an easy fix is the most dangerous thing about him, and that the universe will keep punishing it as long as he keeps reaching. What lingers after the crystal is the way it exposes the gap between what Morty thinks he is chasing and what he is actually chasing. He thinks he wants Jessica, wants love, wants a good life. What the crystal reveals is that he is so afraid, so avoidant, so unable to actually reach for the people he loves, that even his fantasy of a perfect ending is built on distance. In the vision, he never gets close to Jessica. He never spends real time with her. He holds her at arm's length his whole life and ends up with a stranger's kindness at the end. The drug did not lie to him, exactly. It showed him the truth of where his patterns lead. He just could not see it until it was too late, blinded by the part that promised him the thing he wanted, while quietly delivering the thing he feared. And that gap between the love he imagines and the distance he actually keeps is the same gap that runs through his whole life, the reason he can crave connection and flee it at the same time, the reason he reaches for a crystal instead of reaching for the girl. There is a quiet cruelty in the fact that the crystal's power is, at bottom, just a vivid version of how Morty already lives. He is a boy who is always somewhere other than where he is, always reaching for a future or fleeing a past, never quite present in the moment in front of him. The crystal simply makes that literal, pulling his whole attention out of his real life and into a projected ending, so that he stops living in order to chase a death. And the lesson Rick offers at the very end of the episode, almost in passing, is that a person has to both think ahead and live in the moment, that the answer is not one or the other. It is a rare flash of something like wisdom from Rick, and it names exactly what is wrong with the boy. Morty cannot live in the moment because the moment hurts, and so he is forever fixated on a future fix, a coming reward, a better ending, and that fixation is itself the thing draining the life out of his days. The crystal did not give him that flaw. It only showed him, in the most extreme form possible, what the flaw will cost him if he never learns to set it down. And then, at the very end, after the spree and the revelation and the wreckage, Rick portals in and asks Morty to come on another adventure. And a furious, devastated Morty immediately agrees. That is the final note of the whole episode, and it is the addiction in a single beat. The boy has just been through hell, has just learned that the thing he chased was a lie, has just been shown a vision of his own lonely death. And the moment the next fix is offered, the moment Rick opens the door, he goes. He does not pause. He does not learn. He steps right back onto the ride, because the crystal was only ever one drug, and the deeper one, the one underneath all of them, is still standing right there in the garage, holding a portal open, asking if he wants to come along. So the Death Crystal is the show's clearest confession of what is wrong with Morty, the one time it lets the addiction stand fully in the light. It is the boy's hunger for love and peace and belonging, turned into a literal object, and it shows exactly what that hunger does to him when something offers to satisfy it. It consumes him, it turns him into a killer, and it pays out, in the end, a vision of the very loneliness it promised to cure. The boy who chased one perfect death learned that the death he was chasing was alone, and then he picked up the next thing the universe handed him and chased that instead, because the wanting was never really about the crystal. It was about the hole the crystal slotted into, the same hole the grave dug years before, the one no fix has ever managed to fill. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Death Crystal showed the addiction in its purest form, a boy who murdered his way toward a fantasy of love and found a vision of dying alone. Next, we go to the gentler, quieter fixes, the screens and the simulated lives the show keeps offering him, and the way Morty keeps disappearing into them. Section 5. A life inside the screen. Not every fix the show hands. Morty is loud. Some of them are quiet, even comforting, dressed up as harmless fun, and those are the ones that say the most about the shape of his hunger. Underneath the death crystals and the killing sprees runs a softer, steadier craving, the pull toward escape itself, toward any door that leads out of his own life and into a borrowed one. The show keeps offering Morty these doors, and Morty keeps walking through them, and the most telling thing is how little resistance he puts up. The boy who screams and protests on the dangerous adventures goes willingly, almost gratefully, into the gentle escapes, because a gentle escape is exactly what an addict learns to love most. It does not look like a problem, it looks like rest. The clearest single example sits in the second season, in an episode named after a night out. Rick sells a weapon to an assassin so the two of them can spend an afternoon at an alien arcade, and at that arcade is a game called Roy, a virtual reality machine that lets the player live an entire human life from the inside. You put on the helmet and you become Roy, a boy growing up in an ordinary American town, and you live his whole life, decade by decade, with no memory of the world outside, no awareness that you are playing a game at all. You are simply Roy, and Roy's life is the only life there is. Morty puts on the helmet and lives 55 years inside it, a full lifetime, childhood to adulthood to a quiet death in a carpet store, all of it passing in a few minutes of arcade time. What makes the moment land is how seamlessly Morty disappears into it. The game begins with Roy as a boy, waking from a nightmare, telling his mother he dreamed he was with an old man who put a helmet on him. That dream is the truth, the last flicker of the real Morty before the simulation swallows him whole, and then it is gone. He forgets. He becomes Roy completely. He lives a whole human life, falls into its rhythms, builds it, loses himself in it so totally that the boy who walked into the arcade ceases to exist for 55 years. And the thing the show is quietly showing is how good Morty is at this, how naturally he vanishes into a fabricated life when one is offered. He does not cling to himself. He lets go. He becomes someone else, somewhere else, with a speed and a completeness that should be alarming and is played as a joke. The genius of the Roy game, as a piece of the addiction story, is that it is the safest possible version of escape, and that is exactly why it is so seductive. No one dies, no world is destroyed. Morty does not have to make a single hard choice or face a single consequence. He simply gets to be a different person, with a different life for a while, and then take the helmet off and go back. It is escape without cost, the dream every addict chases, the high with no hangover. And the show knows it is a dream, which is why it frames the whole thing with a punchline. After Morty's 55 years, Rick plays the same game and immediately takes Roy off the grid, breaking the simulation, refusing to live the scripted life at all. Rick treats it as a thing to beat. Morty treats it as a thing to live inside. The difference between them is the difference between a man playing a game and a boy looking for somewhere to hide. The pull toward the screen runs back further than the arcade, all the way to the first season and the episode where Rick rewires the family television to receive shows from every reality at once. The premise is simple: infinite channels, infinite alternate versions of everything, an endless scroll of other worlds to watch instead of living in your own. And it is in that episode, watching this infinite static, that Morty delivers the speech that became the show's thesis, the one about nobody existing on purpose and everybody dying, and the only sane response being to come watch television. The line is famous for its bleakness, but inside this climb it reads differently. It is an invitation to escape, spoken by the boy who has learned to escape best. The cure he offers his despairing sister is not connection or hope or change. It is the screen. Come numb out. Come disappear into the endless channels and stop feeling the weight of your own life. That is the boy's medicine, and he is prescribing it to someone he loves. What the screen offers, in all its forms, is the same thing the grave offered and the crystal offered: a way out of being Morty. The infinite cable lets him watch every other version of everything, which is its own kind of leaving, a way to be everywhere and nowhere, instead of stuck in the one painful life he has. The Roy game lets him become a whole other person for a lifetime, and both of them feed the same hunger, the wish to not be himself, to not be the boy with the grave in the backyard, and the grandfather who barely cares, and the crush he cannot reach. The adventures are escape through danger. The screens are escape through surrender, but they are the same instinct, the same craving for a door, and Morty answers both with the same eagerness. The show is careful to show that this escape, like all of Morty's fixes, does not actually heal anything. The Roy game is the proof. Morty lives a full life inside it, 55 years of being someone else. And what does it give him? It gives him a moment, near the end, where the simulated Roy beats cancer and then makes the mistake of going back to his ordinary job, selling carpets, a choice the game treats as a failure, a life not fully lived. Morty experiences an entire human existence, complete with its disappointments, and then takes the helmet off and is still exactly the boy he was, still standing in the arcade, still carrying everything he walked walked in with. The escape was total and it changed nothing. He spent a lifetime away from himself and came back to find himself unchanged, which is the truth about every escape he attempts. The door always leads back to the same room. There is something worth sitting with in how the screens and simulations let Morty practice the thing that is most dangerous about him, the disappearing. Every time he vanishes into a fabricated life and comes back, he gets a little more fluent in the move, a little more comfortable with letting his real self dissolve, and the more fluent he becomes, the easier it is to reach for the next escape and the next, because his identity has learned to be optional. A person who has lived 55 years as someone else, even in a game, has loosened something in themselves, has proven to themselves that being Morty is not a fixed fact, but a setting that can be changed. That loosening is exactly what an addiction needs. It needs a self that is willing to dissolve, a person who would rather be anyone else, anywhere else, than sit still inside the life they actually have. The Infinite Cable episode pairs the escape with its consequence in a way the show rarely makes explicit, and it is worth following. While Morty watches the endless channels, his family uses a pair of goggles to peer into the lives of their alternate selves, the versions of themselves who made different choices and ended up richer or happier or more successful, and the peering devastates them. His mother and father spiral into resentment, each blaming the other for the life they did not get. His sister discovers she was unwanted and prepares to run away. Looking at the other lives, the better lives, the lives they might have had, poisons the life they actually have, and that is the danger of the screen made plain. When you spend your time watching other worlds, the real one starts to feel like a disappointment, a consolation prize, a thing to be endured rather than lived. The escape does not just fail to heal, it makes the thing you are escaping from feel worse by comparison. Morty is the one who is supposedly immune to this, the one who says he does not care enough about himself to even look at his alternate lives. Rick praises him for it, but read inside the addiction, that is not health, that is surrender. Morty does not need to look at better versions of himself because he has already given up on the idea that his own life is worth investing in. He is not above the comparison, he is beneath it, so checked out from his own existence that he does not even feel the pull to imagine a better one. He just wants to numb out in front of the screen with his grandfather and stop thinking about it. That is the boy's resting state when he is not being dragged through danger, a kind of soft despair that asks only to be left alone with the endless channels. The escape also explains something about why Morty keeps going back to Rick specifically, because Rick is the great door, the man who can open a passage to anywhere. The portal gun is the ultimate version of the screen, the ultimate escape, a tool that can leave any situation, any consequence, any reality the instant it stops being bearable, and Morty is bonded to the person who carries it. Part of what he is addicted to, in his grandfather, is the access, the knowledge that with Rick, there is always a way out, always another world one portal away. The boy who learned in the backyard that you can flee a ruined reality found a permanent supplier in the man who can flee any reality at all. The adventures, the screens, the simulations, the portals, they are all the same promise, wearing different faces. You never have to stay, you never have to feel. There is always another door, and the boy keeps choosing the door. That is the steady fact underneath all the spectacle. When the show wants to be loud, it gives Morty a death crystal and a killing spree. When it wants to be quiet, it sits him in front of a television or slips a helmet over his head. And the quiet version is, in some ways, the more honest one. Because the quiet escapes show the craving, stripped of drama, reduced to its essence. A boy who would simply rather not be himself, who reaches for any chance to disappear, who treats his own life as a thing to get away from, rather than a thing to live. The death crystal made the addiction visible by making it violent. The screens make it visible by making it gentle, by showing how willingly Morty surrenders when surrender is offered with no danger attached. The deepest sadness of this layer is that the escapes are, in a way, the boy's attempt to take care of himself. He is not reaching for these doors out of malice or recklessness. He is reaching for them because his real life hurts, because the grave is in the backyard and the grandfather is cold, and the love he wants is out of reach, and the screens and the simulations offer him a few minutes of relief from all of that. He is self-medicating, the way people do, trying to manage a pain he cannot fix with the only tools the universe keeps handing him. And the show's verdict is gentle but firm. The relief is real, and the relief is a trap. Every minute he spends inside a borrowed life is a minute he does not spend building his own, and a boy who never builds his own life never learns that it might have been worth living. The escape always returns him to the same room, a little emptier, a little more practiced at leaving, a little more sure that the only good thing about his life is the door out of it. So the screens and the simulations are the soft center of Morty's addiction, the part that does not look like a problem at all. They are the 55-year life lived in an afternoon, the infinite channels watched instead of lived, the gentle invitation to come numb out and stop feeling. They are the boy's medicine for a pain he cannot name, and they work exactly as well as such medicine ever does, which is to say, not at all, except to deepen the thing they were meant to ease. The grave taught him he could leave. The crystal showed him what chasing a fantasy could cost. And the screens show him the quietest truth of all, that given the smallest chance to stop being himself, he will take it every time, without a fight, with something close to relief. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The screens revealed the gentlest fix of all, a boy who disappears into borrowed lives because his own hurts too much to stay in. Next, the focus turns to what these escapes have actually made of him, the chaos Morty causes when he is left alone, and the darkness the adventures have quietly grown inside the boy. Section 6. What the adventures made of him. There is a question the show keeps circling, sometimes openly and sometimes only in the way it stages a scene. And the question is simple. What has all of this done to Morty? Not the trauma he carries, not the fear in his stomach, but the deeper change, the slow reshaping of who the boy is. Because an addiction does not just take a person's time and a person's peace, it remakes them. It files away the parts that get in the way of the craving and hardens the parts that serve it until the person who comes out the other side is someone the person who went in would not recognize. And the show is honest, more honest than it gets credit for, that the Morty of the later seasons is not the Morty of the first. The adventures have made something of him, and the thing they have made is darker, colder, and far more dangerous than the trembling boy who once begged to go home. The cleanest way to see it is to look at what Morty does when Rick is not there to steer. For most of the show, the boy is the brake, the conscience, the one pleading for restraint while Rick does whatever Rick wants. But the series keeps running an experiment, keeps leaving Morty on his own, and the results are alarming. Left to his own devices, with access to Rick's tools and Rick's logic but none of Rick's experience, Morty does not become gentler. He becomes a force of ruin in his own right, and the chaos he causes is sometimes worse than anything his grandfather manages, because Morty brings to it something Rick has long since burned out of himself, the raw, reactive emotion of a hurt teenager with too much power and no one to stop him. The 5th season opens with the sharpest example. Rick sends Morty into a pocket dimension to fetch wine, a dimension where time moves far faster than it does at home, so that a few seconds for Morty is years for the people who live inside it. On his first trip, Morty accepts help from a friendly local, a farmer who carries the wine for him, and that small kindness becomes a catastrophe. The farmer steps through the portal to help, and when he returns to his own world only moments later, decades have passed. His wife is dead. His son has grown up hating the father who seemed to abandon the family. The son kills the father, and before the father dies, he tells the son that Morty is to blame. And from that single accident, an entire civilization rises, generation after generation, all of them built around one purpose, killing the boy who comes through the door. What Morty does with this is the part that matters. Each time he returns for more wine, the society has advanced, grown larger and angrier, and more committed to his destruction. And eventually, Morty stops apologizing. He stops trying to explain. Fed up with the setbacks, he arms himself with every weapon and every piece of armor he can get from Rick's supply, and he massacres the entire kingdom, slaughtering a civilization in a fit of rage because they keep getting in the way of his errand. He does it not as a careful plan, but as a tantrum, a teenager lashing out with godlike tools at a world that has wronged him. The boy who once cried over a single death wipes out an entire people because they made his wine run difficult, and he does it without Rick anywhere near, which means there is no one to blame but the thing the adventures have grown inside him. This is the pattern the show keeps returning to. When Morty is left alone, his good intentions curdle into chaos, and his hurt curdles into violence. He tries to do the right thing, and it blows up. He gets pushed, and he snaps. The 5th season episode where Rick replaces him shows it again, when Morty teams up with a man he believes to be a fellow discarded victim of Rick, only for the man to turn out to be a murderer, and for Morty to end up cutting off his own hand to escape him. The boy keeps walking into disasters when he is on his own, partly out of bad luck, and partly because the adventures have trained him to reach for extreme solutions, to treat violence and escape as ordinary tools, to respond to a hard situation the way Rick taught him, with overwhelming force and no second thoughts. The show has a character named this directly, all the way back in the 1st season. When Bird Person asks Morty why he cares so much about continuing the adventures if he hates them, he is pointing at the same thing. Being with Rick has changed Morty, and the change is not just emotional damage. It is a kind of corruption, a slow transfer of Rick's worst instincts into a younger, less guarded mind. Morty has gained confidence over the seasons, yes, but he has gained it by becoming colder and more violent, by absorbing the lesson that life is a fight and people are obstacles, and the answer to a problem is usually a weapon. The adventures did not just hurt him, they taught him, and what they taught him is exactly the thing that makes Rick so dangerous and so lonely, passed down to a boy who is now carrying it into his own life. That is the cruelest mechanism of this whole addiction, the way it does not only consume Morty, but reshapes him in the image of the thing he is hooked on. He is becoming Rick, slowly, partially, but unmistakably. The capacity for sudden, overwhelming violence, the willingness to treat whole worlds as disposable, the instinct to reach for the extreme solution and never look back at the wreckage. These are not things Morty was born born with. The trembling boy of the first episode did not have them. They grew in him over years of adventures, transferred from grandfather to grandson, the way a habit passes down a family, and the show treats that inheritance as the real damage, more lasting than any single trauma. You can heal from a trauma. It is much harder to undo who you have become. The Death Crystal episode, covered earlier in this climb, is part of this same pattern, and it deserves a second look through this lens. When the crystal took hold of Morty, what came out was not a confused boy, but a cold and methodical killer, capable of slaughtering his way across a town in pursuit of a goal. That capacity had to come from somewhere. It did not appear from nothing the moment he picked up the crystal. The crystal simply gave a direction to something the adventures had already built, a reservoir of violence and detachment that was waiting in the boy, ready to be pointed. A truly innocent Morty, an unchanged Morty, would not have been able to do what Crystal Morty did. The fact that he could, the fact that the rampage came so easily once he had a reason, is the show telling the audience how much darkness the adventures had already grown inside him before the crystal ever lit the fuse. There is a particular horror in watching a 14-year-old absorb these things, because a child is supposed to be the one who has not yet been hardened, the one with the soft edges and the open heart. Morty started that way. The early seasons show a genuinely kind boy, awkward and frightened, but decent, the kind of kid who tries to save a gaseous alien out of pure compassion even when it costs him. And the show takes that boy and runs him through years of an addiction that rewards coldness and punishes softness, that teaches him over and over that his kindness leads to disaster and his ruthlessness keeps him alive. By the later seasons, the softness has been worn down. He is quicker to anger, quicker to violence, quicker to write off the people his actions hurt. The adventures have been sanding him into something harder, and the boy who used to flinch now reaches for the gun. What the show refuses to do, to its credit, is let this become a clean villain origin. Morty is not turning into a monster in any simple sense. He is still capable of kindness, still capable of guilt, still recognizably the boy he was, just buried deeper under the damage. The change is partial and uneven and human, the way real change is. He has good days and bad ones. He stands up for himself in ways the early Morty never could, and some of that new strength is genuinely growth rather than corruption. The show is not saying the adventures only ruined him. It is saying the adventures changed him in ways he cannot control or fully see, and that the changes are tangled together, the confidence and the coldness growing from the same root, the strength and the violence feeding each other, so that Morty can never be sure which parts of who he has become are improvement and which are damage. That uncertainty is its own kind of trap, and it connects back to why he cannot quit, because the adventures have made Morty into someone who needs the adventures. The hardness he has grown, the capacity for violence, the detachment, these are not skills that fit an ordinary life. A boy who has learned to massacre a kingdom over wine does not slot easily back into high school. The adventures have shaped him into a creature that only the adventures have a use for, which means leaving them would mean not just giving up the fix, but giving up the person the fix has made him. He would have to become someone smaller, gentler, more ordinary, and he no longer knows how. The addiction has remade him in its own image, so thoroughly that the life outside it no longer has a place for who he has become. That is how a habit becomes a cage. It changes you until you no longer fit anywhere but inside it. The show stages the consequences of this most painfully when Morty has to face the people his changes have cost, when he confronts the father he abandoned in the ruined dimension, when he has to answer for the worlds he has helped destroy. The boy has no clean defense, because the truth is that he has become someone who could do those things and keep going. The kind boy of the first season would have been destroyed by guilt. The later Morty carries it differently, more numbly, the way a person carries a thing they have learned not to look at directly. That numbness is the adventure's work too. They taught him not to feel the wreckage, the same skill Rick has, the talent for not looking, and a boy who has learned not to feel the wreckage is a boy who can keep causing it. The hardening protects him from the pain of what he does, and the protection lets him do more. So the answer to the question the show keeps circling, what has all of this done to Morty, is darker than it first appears. It has not just frightened him or traumatized him, it has remade him. It has grown a coldness in him that was not there before, a capacity for violence, a willingness to treat worlds as disposable, an ability to not feel the cost. It has passed down to him the very things that make his grandfather a tragedy, transferred them from an old broken man into a boy who is still becoming whoever he is going to be, and it has shaped him so thoroughly that he no longer fits anywhere but inside the thing that is changing him, which means the change itself has become a reason he cannot leave. The adventures made Morty into someone who needs the adventures, and that closed loop, more than any single trauma, is the measure of how deep the damage goes. The boy left alone is dangerous, because the boy was never really left alone. Rick is in him now, the worst of Rick, grown quietly inside a kid who only ever wanted to be liked and to feel chosen. And when the steering hand is gone, when there is no Rick beside him to point the violence somewhere else, it comes out raw and unguided, a teenager with godlike tools and a hardened heart, and no one to tell him to stop. stop. That is what the addiction has made. Not a villain, not a monster, but something sadder. A good boy slowly being filed into the shape of the thing that is destroying him, becoming more like his grandfather. With every adventure he swears will be the last. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This section showed what the adventures have grown inside the boy. A coldness and a capacity for ruin passed down from the grandfather he cannot quit. Next, we go to the bleakest revelation of all. A single line from the most recent stretch of the show, where Rick names the thing in Morty's blood, and the boy is left staring at his own future. Section 7. The disease in the blood. The most recent stretch of the show, the run of episodes airing now, takes the whole question of Morty's addiction and pushes it somewhere it had only ever hinted at before. It stops treating the boy's craving as a thing that happened to him, a wound inflicted by circumstance, and starts asking whether it was always going to happen, whether it is written into him at a level no choice could reach. And in one episode, through one quiet, devastating line, the show gives its answer. Rick looks at his grandson and tells him, with grim sincerity, that alcoholism is a genetic disease, and that Morty already has it. The boy says nothing. The show holds on the moment, and everything the climb has built to this point shifts under the weight of it, because if the addiction is in the blood, then the grave and the crystal and the screens were never the cause. They were only the symptoms of a thing that was waiting in Morty all along. The episode is built around Rick's drinking, the oldest and most visible addiction in the whole show. It opens with Rick at his lowest, blackout drunk, having locked himself out of his own lab because he is too far gone to remember the password. And from that small, pathetic problem, the episode unfolds a portrait of a man so trapped in his cycle that he has engineered elaborate machinery just to keep functioning around his own disease. He has built, it turns out, a fake friend, a folksy companion who shows up to take Rick and Morty on a warm, gentle fishing trip, and the friend is revealed to be a robot, a synthetic creation whose secret purpose is to serve as a backup, a way for Rick to recover access to his own systems when he has drunk himself past the point of remembering. Rather than confront the drinking, Rick has built a person to manage the fallout of it. The disease is so untouchable, so undefeated, that the smartest man alive would rather construct a fake friendship than face it. For Morty, the discovery is a fresh betrayal in a long line of them. The fishing trip had felt real. It had felt like one of the rare, uncomplicated good times, a moment of warmth between him and his grandfather without the usual danger and cruelty. And then it is revealed to be a system, a security protocol wearing the face of a friend, just another of Rick's machines, built to manage Rick's problems. The friend even says, before the truth comes out, the line that becomes the emotional center of the episode, that Rick and Morty may fight, but they are the real deal. It is the kind of warmth the show rarely lets its characters feel, and it turns out to be programmed, manufactured by Rick for his own convenience. Morty learns, again, that the warmth he reached for was engineered, that the connection was a tool, exactly the lesson the cloaking device taught him seasons ago, now repeated in a new and crueler key. But the heart of the episode is not the robot, it is the argument between Rick and Morty, and the line at the end. The two of them fight, the way they always fight, and in the middle of it, Rick says something that cuts straight to the bone of this whole climb. He tells Morty that you cannot love something out of hurting you. Morty, hurt and angry, throws it back at him, says that Rick would sure love that to be true, and Rick snaps. The exchange is about their whole relationship, about the impossibility of fixing a broken bond through sheer devotion, about the way love does not actually protect you from the damage the loved thing does. And it sits inside an episode about addiction, which means it is also about that, about the way you cannot love an addict out of their disease, and the way you cannot love your own way out of the thing you have inherited. The episode bookends itself with two versions of the same verdict, and the symmetry is the point. At the start, drunk and furious, Rick snarls at Morty that the boy will not inherit anything from him, throwing it out as a cruel dismissal, a way to wound. And by the end, the cruelty has curdled into something worse, something true. Rick delivers the inverse, telling Morty with grim seriousness that there is one thing he will inherit after all, that alcoholism is a genetic disease, and the boy already has it. The opening insult promised Morty nothing. The closing truth promises him the one thing no one would want. The disease will pass down. It is already there. The boy is not standing at the start of a road he might avoid. He is standing in the middle of one he was born onto. And the final image of the episode is Morty's face. The show ends not on Rick, but on the boy, watching his grandfather fall back into the old patterns, watching him give up on the idea of a better way and start emptying his flasks, watching the cycle close back into itself, exactly as it was at the beginning. The episode's own framing, and the way critics described it, is that Morty is watching his own future. He is looking at Rick and seeing what he will become, the disease in the blood, the cycle that cannot be broken, the warmth that turns out to be machinery, the love that cannot protect anyone, all of it laid out in front of the boy as a preview of the years ahead. He does not say anything. There is nothing to say. He just watches, and the watching is the whole horror. This is the moment the show stops being coy about what Morty is. For seasons, the addiction was something the audience inferred, a pattern the boy lived out without anyone naming it. The death crystal made it visible. The screens made it gentle, but this episode makes it heritable, ties it to blood and family, and the simple, brutal fact that Morty is Rick's grandson, made of the same stuff, carrying the same flaw. The drinking is just the most obvious form the disease takes in Rick. The same route the show suggests, the same compulsion to reach for the thing that numbs and escapes and harms, runs in Morty too, and it has been showing up his whole life in the forms this climb has traced. The adventures, the crystal, the screens, the desperate need for Rick, they are all the same disease, wearing different clothes, the family curse expressing itself through whatever the boy happens to be near. What makes this so much darker than a simple sad ending is what it does to the idea of Morty's free will. If the addiction is a choice, then there is hope, because choices can be made differently. The boy could, in theory, decide to stop, to walk away, to build a different life. But if the addiction is in the blood, then the choices were always going to bend toward it, the way water bends downhill. The grave did not create the hunger, it revealed it. The crystal did not turn Morty into an addict, it found the addict already there and gave it a target. The screens did not teach him to escape, they offered an outlet for an instinct that was waiting in him from birth. The whole climb, read through this episode, becomes the story of a disease finding its expressions, a thing in the blood reaching for whatever the world hands it, and a boy who never really had a clean shot at being anyone else. The show is careful, though, not to make this a total surrender of hope, because that is not how the disease actually works, and the writers clearly know it. The episode's own structure and the interviews around it point to a more complicated truth. The series creator has spoken about wanting to portray addiction honestly, to mythologize the real thing about it, which is that it takes all forms, and that the moment of facing it has to belong to the addict themselves. No one can force Rick to confront his drinking. No one can love him out of it. And the same will be true of Morty. The disease may be in the blood, but the blood is not the whole story. What a person does with what they inherit is still, in some narrow and difficult way, theirs. The episode does not say Morty is doomed. It says Morty is at risk, born onto a hard road, carrying a thing that will keep trying to express itself, and that whether he ends up like Rick is a question the show is deliberately leaving open, hanging on the boy's silent, frightened face. That open question is what makes the final image so heavy. Morty is watching Rick relapse, watching the cycle close, watching the smartest man alive prove once again that intelligence is no defense against this particular disease. And the boy is being asked, in that moment, to see himself in it. He is being shown the end of the road he is on. The whole tragedy of the episode is that seeing it might not be enough to change it, because the disease does not care whether you can see it coming. Rick can see his own perfectly. He understands his addiction with total clarity, can describe it, can name it as genetic, can predict exactly how it will play out, and the understanding does nothing to stop him. He builds a robot friend instead of facing it. He empties his flasks instead of changing. And Morty, watching, is being shown that the clarity he is gaining now, the understanding of what he is and where he is headed, may be just as useless to him as it has been to his grandfather. You can know the whole shape of your disease and still be helpless against it. That is the bleakest thing the episode says, and it says it by ending on a boy who now knows too much and can do nothing with it. There is a generational weight to this that the show has been building toward for a long time. Morty's mother, Beth, grew up with Rick's alcoholism, carries her own dependency, reaches for wine the way her father reaches for his flask. The disease is already visible across the family, already moving down the line, and now the show names Morty as the next carrier. The curse is not new, and it is not stopping. It moves from Rick to Beth to Morty, generation after generation, the same hunger expressing itself in each, and the boy is simply the latest to inherit it. That framing turns Morty's whole story into something larger than one boy's struggle. It becomes the story of a family disease, a thing that passes down whether anyone wants it to or not, and a boy who is just now realizing that the thing destroying his grandfather is the same thing that has been quietly steering his own life since the beginning. The cruelty of the inheritance is that Morty never chose Rick, never chose to be born into this family, never chose the blood he carries. He was a 14-year-old boy with a crush and a nervous stomach when the show began, and the disease was already in him, waiting. Everything the universe handed him after that, the portals and the crystals and the screens, simply gave the disease somewhere to go. The boy who could not say no, all the way back in the first section of this climb, was not weak or foolish. He was sick, in a way he could not see and could not name, carrying a thing that made the no impossible, long before he understood it was there. The episode reframes the entire character with that one line. Morty was never just a boy being led astray. He was always a boy with a disease in his blood, finding, in his grandfather and his grandfather's world, the perfect conditions for it to grow. So the bleakest revelation of the whole climb is not a thing that happens to Morty. It is a thing that was always inside him. The addiction the show has been tracing through every form, the adventures and the crystal and the screens and the desperate need for Rick, turns out to share a root, and the root is in the blood, passed down through a family that cannot stop reaching for the things that hurt it. Rick names it out loud, tells the boy he already has it, and then proves, by relapsing in front of him, that knowing is no cure. And the show ends on Morty's face, watching his own future play out in the man across the room, carrying a disease he did not choose, born onto a road he did not pick, looking at the end of it and unable to say a word. The grave taught him he could run. This episode tells him there is one thing he can never run from, because it is not out there in the world, it is in him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This section named the disease in the blood, a hunger Morty was born carrying, and a grandfather who proved that knowing it changes nothing. Next, the focus turns to the way the boy learned to erase the cost of it all, the stolen memories and the do-over device, and the question of whether a person who can delete his own pain ever has to grow. Section 8. The things he got to forget. There is a kind of escape that is darker than running to another world, and the show hands it to Morty more than once. It is the escape into forgetting, the chance to simply delete the parts of his life he cannot bear, to wipe away the pain and the guilt and the consequences as if they never happened. For an addict, this is the most dangerous gift imaginable, because the whole engine of addiction runs on not having to feel the cost, and the show keeps giving Morty exactly that, the ability to erase what hurts, and then keeps showing what it does to a person who never has to carry anything. A boy who can forget his worst moments never has to learn from them. A boy who can undo his mistakes never has to grow past them. The forgetting is the purest fuel the addiction ever gets, and Morty is soaked in it. The clearest look comes in the third season, in an episode built around Morty's memories. It begins with the boy tormented by something he cannot stop thinking about, and asking Rick to take it away, to erase the memory so he no longer has to live with it. And Rick reveals that he has done this many times before. There is a hidden room beneath the garage, and in it are rows of stored memories, things Rick has removed from Morty's mind over the years, the moments too traumatic for the boy to hold. The room is a catalog of everything Morty has been allowed to forget, and as the episode plays through them, the audience sees just how much the boy has been carrying, or rather how much he has been spared from carrying, because someone kept reaching into his head and taking the worst of it out. The memories are genuinely horrifying. There is the time Morty accidentally drove an innocent man to suicide, framing him without meaning to, and watched the consequences unfold. There is the time he tricked two scientists into taking his and Rick's place in an alien menagerie, condemning them to a cage. There is the time he doomed an alien's afterlife. There is the memory, removed by his mother rather than himself, where she was forced to choose between her children and chose his sister without hesitation, leaving Morty behind. Each of these is a wound, a thing that would shape a person, a thing that would teach them something, or break them, and each of them has been lifted out of Morty's mind and stored in a tube in a basement, so the boy could go on as if it never happened. This is escape taken to its logical end. The screens let Morty leave his life for a while. The portals let him leave his world. But the memory removal lets him leave his own past, edit himself, become a person who never did the terrible things he did. And the show is sharp about what that means. A person who can erase their mistakes never has to integrate them, never has to become someone who has reckoned with what they have done. They stay smooth, unmarked, perpetually able to pretend. The trauma that should have taught Morty caution, or guilt, or wisdom was simply deleted, leaving him free to make the same kinds of mistakes again, because the lessons were thrown in a drawer before they could take. The forgetting does not heal the wound. It just removes the scar that would have reminded him not to touch the fire. And the episode adds a layer of cruelty that ties it straight back to the cloaking device, and the whole question of how little Morty's own mind belongs to him. Among the memories Rick removed are not just the ones too painful for Morty. There are also memories Rick took out for his own sake, moments where Rick looked foolish, where he made a mistake, where he lost a game to his grandson, or said something stupid. Rick reached into Morty's head and scrubbed those away too, not to protect the boy, but to protect his own pride, to make sure his grandson only remembered him at his best. The boy's mind is a curated thing, shaped by a man who decides which truths Morty is allowed to keep. Morty does not even own the contents of his own head. Parts of it have been edited out, for his comfort and for Rick's, and he did not consent to most of it, and does not even know what is missing. When Morty discovers this, that Rick has been editing him for pride rather than mercy, the boy turns on his grandfather, and the confrontation goes so wrong that both of them end up with their memories wiped entirely, forgetting who they are and who each other are. And here the episode delivers its darkest beat. The amnesiac Morty, trying to rebuild himself by loading memory after memory back into his head, is so overwhelmed by the horror of what he finds, by the sheer accumulated weight of everything he has done and suffered, that he decides he would rather die than be this person. He convinces Rick, equally lost, to join him in a suicide pact. Two figures with guns to their own heads, undone by the simple act of having to feel, all at once, the things they had spent years carefully not feeling. The point lands hard. The reason Morty could function at all, the reason he could keep going on adventure after adventure, was that the worst of it had been removed. The forgetting was not a luxury, it was load-bearing. Take it away, force him to hold everything at once, and the boy cannot survive it. He would rather not exist than be the person who did all of those things and felt all of those things. That is the truth the memory room hides. this. Morty is not actually okay. He has never been okay. He has only been emptied out at intervals, spared the full weight, kept functional by a grandfather who keeps removing the parts that would otherwise crush him. The smooth, surviving Morty the audience watches is a Morty who has been edited into bearability, and the moment the edits are undone, he reaches for a gun. The fourth season takes the same idea, the deletion of consequence, and turns it into one of the show's most quietly brutal episodes. Morty, frustrated that Rick never respects his ideas, goads his grandfather into building a device he has always wanted, a save point, like in a video game. The idea is simple and seductive. You save a moment in time, and then if something goes wrong, you return to the save point and try again, with no consequences, no cost, infinite do-overs. It is the dream of every gamer and the dream of every addict, the fantasy of a life where nothing you do can ever truly stick, where every mistake can be erased, and every choice can be unmade. And Rick, annoyed, builds it for him. What Morty does with it is revealing. He uses it, at first, for small things, then for a fantasy of real happiness. He saves a moment before meeting a girl, builds a relationship with her, lives through a whole arc of love and struggle and survival, and when it falls apart, he resets. And resets again, chasing the perfect version of a life with her. He uses the device to try to engineer happiness without risk, love without the possibility of loss. And it does not work. The relationship he keeps trying to perfect keeps slipping away, and eventually, he overwrites the save point and loses it entirely, and in his despair, he tries to use the device to kill himself, resetting each time, trapped in a loop of a boy trying to escape a pain he cannot reset his way out of. The consequence-free fantasy becomes its own prison, and then Rick reveals the truth, and it is the cruelest version of the lesson the show ever delivers. The device was never a save point. Rick does not believe in time travel and never built it. What the device actually did, every time Morty pressed the button thinking he was returning to a saved moment, was kill him and replace him with a version from a parallel reality where the mistake had not happened. There were no do-overs. There was only a boy dying over and over, and other boys stepping into his place, a whole graveyard of dead Mortys stretching out behind the one who survived. Everything Morty did, every consequence he thought he was erasing, actually happened somewhere to someone, and the bodies are real. The fantasy of escaping consequence was itself the consequence, a trail of corpses the boy left behind in his desperate attempt to live without cost. The episode forces Morty to face this, and the way it forces him is perfect. Rick offers to merge all the realities together, to collapse the graveyard into a single timeline so that only one Morty did all the things, which means the surviving boy has to carry the full weight of every action he thought he had erased. And then, to escape the mob that gathers, Rick makes Morty do the one thing the whole episode has been building toward. He makes him jump into a vat of fake acid to fake his own death, the exact plan Morty had mocked at the start as a stupid idea. The boy who wanted to live without consequences ends the episode having learned, at terrible cost, that consequences are the thing that gives a life meaning, that a person becomes who they are precisely by carrying what they have done. He even says it out loud, that you cannot live without consequences, that they are what make us who we are. It is the closest Morty comes to understanding the disease in himself, the hunger to escape the cost of everything. But the show, being the show, undercuts even that. Rick reveals that the whole elaborate lesson was, in part, just Rick's way of proving he was right about the vat of acid, an insane runaround to win an argument and get an I told you so. The growth Morty earned is real, but it is wrapped in cruelty, delivered by a grandfather who killed thousands of versions of his grandson to make a point about his own genius. And Morty, having learned the lesson, goes right back to Rick, right back to the adventures, because the deeper addiction is untouched. He learned that consequences matter, and then he stepped back through the door to the one relationship he refuses to count the cost of. The lesson took, in a way, and in the way that matters most, it did not take at all. What these two episodes share is the recognition that the most dangerous thing the show ever offers Morty is the chance to not feel the cost of his life. The memory room and the save point device are the same temptation in different forms. The promise that you can have all the experience and none of the weight, all the action and none of the consequence, all the mistakes and none of the scars. And both episodes deliver the same verdict. It is a lie, and it is a lie that nearly kills him, because a person who never carries anything has nothing to hold them in place, nothing to teach them, nothing to make them real. The boy who can forget his worst moments never grows past them. The boy who can undo his mistakes never learns from them. And a boy who never grows and never learns is a boy who will keep reaching for the next fix forever, because the thing that would make him stop, the accumulated weight of consequence, keeps getting deleted before it can do its work. The forgetting is the addiction's perfect ally because it removes the natural break. In the real world, consequences are what eventually stop people, the slow accumulation of damage that finally becomes too much to ignore. But Morty keeps getting his consequences erased by Rick's memory device, by the false save points, by the portals that let him flee any world where the bill comes due. He is an addict with the one thing no real addict has, a way to delete the wreckage, and so the wreckage never reaches the size that might force a reckoning. He stays smooth, stays functional, stays able to keep going, precisely because the cost keeps getting wiped before it can land. The forgetting is what lets the disease run unchecked, and the show keeps showing that the only times Morty comes close to a real reckoning are the times the forgetting fails, the times he is forced to hold everything at once, and those are the times he reaches for a gun. So the things Morty got to forget are not mercies. They are the deepest enablers of his addiction, the deletions that let him keep running without ever paying. The memory room kept him functional by emptying out the horror at intervals. The save point device let him chase a life without cost, and revealed that the cost was a graveyard of his own dead selves. Both showed the same truth, that a boy who never feels the weight of his life never has to change it, and that the forgetting which feels like relief is actually the thing keeping him sick. The grave taught him he could run from a place. The crystal and the screens taught him he could run from himself. And the memory room and the save point taught him the most dangerous lesson of all, that he could run from the consequences, that he could be a person who never has to carry what he has done, which is exactly the person an addiction needs its host to be. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This section showed the deepest enabler of all, a boy who got to delete the cost of his own life and so never had to grow past it. Next, we go to the one Morty who broke the cycle, the version of him who got clean, and the cold, perfect line he uses to name the disease the boy in the yellow shirt will never admit he has. Section 9. The one who got clean. Somewhere out in the multiverse, there is a version of Morty who did the thing our Morty never could. He looked at the same grandfather, lived the same abuse, carried the same hunger, and then he stopped. He broke the cycle. He cut the cord. And the show, in its long, patient way, made that Morty into its greatest villain, the cold and brilliant figure the fans named Evil Morty, the one variant who got out. To understand the boy in the yellow shirt, the climb has to look hard at the one who is everything our Morty is not, because Evil Morty is the answer to the question the whole series keeps asking: what does it take to actually quit? And the answer the show gives is bleak. It takes becoming something monstrous. It takes burning down everything. It takes a Morty willing to stop being a Morty at all. The character first appears in the first season, in the same episode that revealed the cloaking device, though the audience does not understand what it is seeing. There is a Morty with an eye patch, partnered with a particularly vicious Rick, and only at the end does the show reveal that the eye patch Morty was the one in control the whole time, that the cruel Rick was a puppet and the Morty was the puppeteer. A Morty had taken a Rick, turned him into a slave, and used him. The natural order of the show, Rick on top and Morty beneath, had been quietly inverted by a single variant who refused to play the assigned part. And then he removed his eye patch, destroyed the evidence, and vanished into the crowd of ordinary Mortys, hidden in plain sight, biding his time. What the show eventually reveals, in fragments across the seasons and then in full, is that Evil Morty's entire goal was never power for its own sake. It was escape. He grew tired of being the disposable sidekick to a god who never saw him, tired of the whole rigged system where every Morty exists to serve and shield a Rick, and he set out to break free of it permanently. The structure the Ricks built, the walled-off region of reality where a Rick is always the smartest being and a Morty is always the tool, was a cage to him, and his whole long scheme was a plan to tear that cage open and walk out into the true infinity beyond, into the part of reality the Ricks abandoned, because out there they are nobody special. He did not want to rule the Ricks. He wanted to never need one again. He wanted out, and he got out. That is the crucial fact. At the end of the 5th season, after seasons of patient maneuvering, Evil Morty cracks open the wall the smartest men in the universe believed was unbreakable, and steps through into the infinite, leaving the whole rigged system behind. He is the one being in the entire show who actually breaks the cycle, who frees himself from the Rick and Morty machine completely. He is, in the language of this climb, the one Morty who got clean. He looked at the addiction, the dependence on Rick, the whole sick structure of being a sidekick to a god, and he found a way to walk away from it for good. He succeeded where our Morty fails every single episode, where our Morty cannot even manage to stay away when Rick himself opens the door. But the show is brutally honest about the cost of that freedom, and this is where Evil Morty becomes the dark mirror rather than the hero. To break the cycle, he had to become something terrible. The cold open of his origin, shown in the 7th season, suggests an abusive relationship with his own Rick. A Morty who fell to the floor in genuine fear of the grandfather who was supposed to protect him and who made, in that moment, a no-going-back decision to end the abuse for good. He did not heal from it. He weaponized it. He turned his Rick into a tool, the same way Ricks turn Mortys into tools, and then he used that tool to climb the rigged ladder of the system, killing countless Ricks and Mortys along the way, destroying an entire city of them to fuel his escape. He got clean, but he did it by becoming as cold and ruthless and empty as the thing he was escaping. The boy who refused to be used became a master of using. He broke the addiction by killing the part of himself that could love, that could connect, that could be hurt. That is the show's hard verdict on what it takes to quit. Our Morty cannot do it, because our Morty still loves Rick, still wants the warmth, still needs to be chosen. The love is the chain. Evil Morty broke the chain by cutting out the love entirely, by becoming someone who needs nothing and no one. And the freedom he won is the freedom of a person who has nothing left to lose because they have already lost the capacity to care. He even names this himself in the moment the show finally calls him Evil Morty. He says that being sick of Rick is what makes him evil, that if you have ever been sick of Rick, you have been evil too. It is a stunning line because it reframes his villainy as nothing more than the natural endpoint of a feeling every Morty has. The difference is that every other Morty swallows the feeling and stays, and this one followed it all the way out. Getting clean, in the world of the show, looks indistinguishable from becoming the villain, because the only way out runs through the destruction of everything that made you want to stay. The most recent season brings Evil Morty back, and in doing so, it delivers the single sharpest line about our Morty's addiction the show has ever produced. In the premiere, our Morty discovers that Rick has been secretly working with Evil Morty, and the discovery wrecks him, because watching his grandfather partner so easily with another version of himself feeds his deepest fear that he is replaceable, that any Morty would do, that the bond he treasures is just a slot any variant could fill. Rick and Evil Morty work together with an ease our Morty can never match, solving problems side by side while the boy floats around in a panic, getting in the way, needing to be saved. And Evil Morty, watching our Morty squirm with jealousy, twists the knife with perfect precision. He tells him that maybe he will steal his grandpa, but not, he says, because he loves him, because our Morty does. That line is the whole climb compressed into a single sentence. Evil Morty, the one who got clean, the one who escaped, names the disease our Morty will never admit to. The thing that keeps our Morty chained, the thing that makes him jealous and desperate and unable to leave, is love. He loves Rick. He is hooked on Rick. And Evil Morty, having burned that love out of himself long ago, can see it in our Morty with total clarity, can name it as the weakness it is, can use it as a weapon precisely because he no longer has it. He does not love Rick. He does not need Rick. He is free. And from that free, cold place, he looks at our Morty and diagnoses him exactly. You are still here because you love him. That is your sickness. I cured myself of it. You never will. What makes this so devastating is that Evil Morty is right, and the show knows he is right, and our Morty cannot argue. The boy is bound by his love, the way an addict is bound by their craving, and the love makes him do things that hurt him, makes him chase a grandfather who pushes him away, makes him jealous of a version of himself who is healthier in the one terrible way that matters. Evil Morty has something our Morty desperately wants, which is freedom from the need, and our Morty has something Evil Morty gave up, which is the capacity to love at all. Neither of them is whole. The one who got clean had to amputate his heart to do it. The one who still has his heart can never get clean. That is the trap the show builds around the whole idea of Morty, the choice between freedom and feeling, with no option that lets you keep both. The premiere complicates even Evil Morty though, and the complication matters. As the episode goes on, it becomes clear that Evil Morty is not as free as he pretends. He keeps coming around. He keeps seeking Rick out. He partners with him, hangs out with him, lingers near the thing he supposedly escaped. And our Morty notices and accuses him of it, and the accusation lands. The show suggests that Evil Morty, for all his freedom, is getting emotionally compromised, that the line between hating Rick and being obsessed with Rick and maybe even wanting Rick has gotten blurry. The one who got clean might be relapsing, because the truth the whole show keeps circling is that you cannot fully escape the bond, not even by becoming a monster, not even by walking out into infinity. Evil Morty cut out his love and still finds himself drawn back, which means the addiction is deeper than love, deeper than choice, something closer to the disease in the blood from the previous chapter, a thing that pulls every Morty toward every Rick no matter how hard they fight it. This is why Evil Morty works so well as the dark mirror. He is the proof that getting clean is possible, and the proof that it costs everything, and the proof that even paying everything might not be enough. He shows our Morty a door out, and the door leads to a place where you have to murder your own heart to walk through it, and even then the pull does not fully release you. Our Morty looks at Evil Morty and sees both his deepest wish and his worst fear at once. The wish is freedom, the fear is what freedom requires, and the boy chooses, every time, without ever quite deciding, to stay sick rather than become the cold and empty thing that freedom demands. He would rather keep the love and keep the chain than break the chain by killing the love. That is not weakness. It might even be the most human choice in the whole show, but it is also the choice that keeps him hooked forever. There is a detail the show is careful about that sharpens all of this. Our Morty, when given the chance, refuses to join Evil Morty. In the 5th season finale, at the moment of Evil Morty's triumph, our Morty chooses Rick over the version of himself who escaped, chooses the grandfather and the chain over the freedom and the cold. He proves his loyalty when it would have been easy and maybe even wise to break it. And the show treats that loyalty as both touching and tragic, because it is the addiction choosing itself, the boy looking at the one path to freedom and turning away from it, because freedom means giving up the thing he loves. Evil Morty got clean and lost his heart. Our Morty kept his heart and stayed sick. And when our Morty had the chance to follow the clean clean one out, he said no and went back to Rick, because the love is stronger than the wish to be free. So the one who got clean is the answer to the question the whole series asks, and the answer is a warning rather than a hope. Yes, a Morty can break the cycle. Yes, escape is possible, but the show shows exactly what it takes, and what it takes is the destruction of everything that made the cycle feel like home. Evil Morty escaped by becoming a being who needs nothing and loves no one, and even he keeps drifting back, which suggests the cord can never be fully cut. Our Morty, watching, is told the truth about himself by the only one who would know. He stays because he loves. That is his disease, and that is his humanity, tangled together so tightly that curing the one would mean killing the other. The boy in the yellow shirt will never get clean, because getting clean would mean becoming the thing in front of him, and he has looked at that thing, that cold and free and heartless version of himself, and decided, without quite knowing he was deciding, that he would rather stay sick and keep his heart than get well and lose it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. This section held up the dark mirror, the one Morty who escaped by burning out his own heart, and the cold line he uses to name our Morty's disease. Next, we go to the final reckoning, the question the whole climb was built to ask, which is what the boy is actually addicted to, and whether the thing that chains him is also the only thing keeping him human. Section 10. What the boy is really hooked on. After the grave and the crystal, and the screens, and the disease in the blood, and the one who got clean, the question the whole climb was built to ask comes into focus. And it is not whether Morty is an addict, because the show settled that long ago, in a dozen episodes and one quiet line at the end of a fishing trip. The real question, the one the series keeps circling, is what the boy is actually hooked on. Not the death crystal, which was only one drug among many. Not the adventures, which are only the surface. Not even Rick, exactly, though Rick is closer. The thing underneath all of it, the substance the boy can never get enough of and can never quite name, turns out to be something stranger and sadder, and naming it is the only way to understand why the boy in the yellow shirt could never have walked the path the cold one walked. What Morty is hooked on is the feeling of mattering. That is the thing underneath every fix this climb has traced. The death crystal promised him a future of love, of being held at the end by someone who cared. The adventures promised him that the smartest man alive had chosen him, of all the Mortys in all the worlds, to ride along. The screens promised him escape from a life where he did not matter at all. And Rick, the deepest hook, promised him the thing he wanted most, which was to be someone in the eyes of someone who was someone. The boy with no friends, the boy his own mother noticed had no one, found in his grandfather the only mirror that ever reflected him back as significant, and he got addicted to the reflection. He is not hooked on danger or on chemicals, or even really on Rick. He is hooked on the version of himself that exists when Rick wants him near. That is why the cloaking device reveal cut so deep all those seasons ago, and why it still echoes through everything. When Morty learned that a Morty is only camouflage, only a tool to hide a Rick's brainwaves, the show was not just revealing a piece of lore, it was poisoning the exact thing Morty was addicted to. The reflection he craved, the proof that he mattered, turned out to be a function. He was wanted for his blankness, chosen for being ordinary enough to hide a genius. The thing he needed most, to matter, was revealed to be the thing he could never actually have, because in the cold logic of the system, he was equipment, interchangeable, replaceable by any other Morty who could muffle the same signal. And the cruelty is that he kept reaching for the reflection anyway, kept chasing the feeling of mattering from a man who only kept him because he did not, which is the most painful version of an addiction there is, a craving for a thing the supplier cannot actually provide. The most recent season makes this unbearable, because it takes Morty's deepest fear and forces him to live inside it. When Rick partners so easily with evil Morty, when the two of them work together with a fluency our Morty can never match, the boy's whole addiction is threatened at the root. If any Morty will do, if the slot can be filled by a colder, smarter version, then the feeling of mattering was always a lie, and the thing Morty has organized his entire self around was never real. His jealousy in those scenes is not petty, it is existential. He is watching the evidence that he was never special, that the reflection he is addicted to could shine just as well on anyone, that he is, in the end, exactly what the cloaking device reveal said he was, a replaceable tool whose only distinction is the love he feels for a man who feels so much less in return. The boy is not afraid of losing Rick, he is afraid of learning that he never mattered to Rick in the first place, which would mean the thing he is hooked on never existed. And here the show makes its deepest, most complicated move, because it refuses to let the answer be entirely bleak. Yes, the system says Morty is camouflage. Yes, the brainwave reveal says he was chosen for his blankness. But the show keeps undercutting the system with small, stubborn evidence that something real exists underneath it. Rick wept at the sight of baby Morty. Rick, in the most recent premiere, secretly made Morty wear a protective suit and used it to tell the real Morty from a disguised imposter, which means that even when Rick claims not to care, he is quietly paying attention in ways Morty never sees. The grandfather who insists the boy is just a tool keeps acting, in small, unguarded moments, like the boy is something more. And so the thing Morty is addicted to, the feeling of mattering, is neither fully real nor fully false. It is real enough to keep him hoping, and false enough to keep him starving, which is the exact condition that makes a craving last forever. This is what separates our Morty from the one who got clean, and it is the heart of the whole climb. Evil Morty solved the problem by deciding the answer was no, that he did not matter to his Rick, that no Morty ever truly matters to any Rick, and then acting on that conclusion with total ruthlessness. He cut out the hope, he stopped reaching for the reflection, because he decided the reflection was a lie, and once you stop needing to matter to someone, you are free of them. But our Morty cannot make that decision, because he cannot stop hoping that he matters, cannot stop reaching for the warmth that sometimes comes, cannot quite believe that the love he feels is as one-sided as the system says it is. The hope is the chain. Evil Morty broke free by killing the hope. Our Morty stays bound because he cannot, because some part of him still believes, against all the evidence, that he matters to Rick, that the reflection is real, that he is more than camouflage, and the show suggests, in its quiet, undercutting way, that he might even be right. That is the cruelest and kindest thing the series does with the boy. It makes his addiction inseparable from his hope, and his hope inseparable from his capacity to love. To get clean, Morty would have to stop hoping that he matters, and to stop hoping that he matters, he would have to stop loving Rick, and to stop loving Rick, he would have to become the cold and empty thing the other Morty became. The addiction and the love are the same substance. The thing that chains him is the thing that keeps him human. A boy who could stop needing to matter to his grandfather would be free, and would also be a monster, because the need to matter to the people we love is not a flaw to be cured. It is the thing that makes us people. Morty's disease, in the end, is just love, with nowhere safe to go, a hunger to be significant to someone who keeps proving and disproving that he is, and the boy would rather stay sick with that hunger than kill it and be free. The show offers no cure, and it is honest about why. The grandfather at the center of the addiction is himself an addict, hooked on his own escapes, his alcohol, his adventures, his refusal to feel, and he is incapable of giving Morty the steady, reliable love that would make the hunger stop. He doles it out in scraps, withholds it for pride, replaces it with machines and missions, and the inconsistency is exactly what keeps Morty hooked. A grandfather who loved Morty fully and openly would cure him, would fill the hole, would let the boy stop reaching. But that grandfather does not exist, because that grandfather would have to face his own pain to become, and he never will. So Morty is left craving a thing his only supplier cannot reliably give, which means the craving can never be satisfied and can never be released, which is the precise shape of a hunger that lasts a lifetime. And the most recent season drives home that the lifetime is the point, with the line about the disease in the blood and the image of Morty watching his own future, because the deepest answer to what the boy is hooked on is that he is hooked on the same thing Rick is hooked on, the same thing Beth is hooked on, the family disease in all its forms. They are all reaching for something to fill a hole that connection should fill and never quite does. Rick reaches for the flask and the adventure and the revenge. Beth reaches for the wine and her father's approval. And Morty reaches for Rick, for the adventures, for the feeling of mattering. All of them chasing the same relief from the same ache, the ache of people who cannot get the love they need from the people they need it from, and who reach for substitutes that never fill the gap. The disease is in the blood because the inability to be loved well and to love well in return is in the blood, passed down through a family that keeps producing people who are starving for each other and cannot manage to feed each other. So when the show ends an episode on Morty's face, watching Rick relapse, watching the cycle close, it is showing the boy his future in the most literal way. He will become this. He will spend his life reaching for the thing that fills the hole and never finding it, reaching for substitutes, reaching for escapes, reaching for the feeling of mattering from people who cannot quite give it. The disease will express itself through whatever the world hands him, the way it has already expressed itself through crystals and screens and adventures and a grandfather. And the boy, watching, understands just enough to be afraid and not enough to escape, because escape would require the one thing the family cannot do, which is to actually face the ache instead of medicating it, to sit in the loneliness instead of running from it, to love each other honestly instead of through the haze of all their fixes. The show's last word on Morty, across everything this climb has traced, is not that he is doomed and not that he is saved, but that he is caught in the most human trap there is. He is a boy who wants to matter to someone, anyone, and who found the only available mirror in a grandfather who cannot reliably reflect him back. Everything he is addicted to is just that hunger wearing different faces. And the tragedy is not that the hunger is shameful, because it is not. The hunger to matter is the most ordinary thing a person can feel. The tragedy is that the boy is starving inside a family that cannot feed him, hooked on a love that comes in scraps, chasing a significance he keeps almost having and never quite holding, and that the only way out, the path the cold one took, would cost him the very heart that makes him worth saving. He could get clean. The show proved it is possible. There is a Morty out there who walked into infinity and never needed a Rick again. But our Morty looked at that path, looked at the freedom and the cost and chose the chain. He chose to keep loving the grandfather who hurts him, to keep hoping he matters, to keep reaching for the warmth that sometimes comes, because the alternative was to stop feeling at all, and he could not pay that price. It is the choice that keeps him sick, and the choice that keeps him kind, and the show refuses to tell the audience which one matters more. The boy in the yellow shirt is an addict, hooked on the feeling of being someone to someone, and he will probably never get clean, and the reason he will never get clean is the same reason he is still, after everything, the most human thing in the whole endless multiverse. He still wants to matter, he still hopes that he does, and he would rather break his heart on that hope, again and again, forever, than kill the part of himself that can hope at all.
If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.